Welcome back to Media 7. I'm discussing two significant reports on Fiji with the reporters themselves, Julian Wilcox of Maori Television's Native Affairs and Richard Pamatato of Radio New Zealand. Now, the Native Affairs report consisted not only of an interview with Commodore Bainimarama, the team also hit the streets to talk to ordinary people.
There's been comments made about poverty in Fiji, that a number of those working 60 to 70%, according to some, workers in Fiji...
No, get your facts right. It's going to go on Maori TV. Is it 60 or 70?
Well, 60 to 70%.
No, it's not.
You're saying it's nowhere near that?
No. So where did you get the 60 and 70 from?
Well, there's a quote from Professor Waden Nasi of the University of
So he's gone 60 and 70 now. Tomorrow it'll probably be 80. Watch out for that guy. He's anti-government.
We asked locals what they thought of their military government.
Fiji is like, ever since we've grown up, it's still the same. It's just all these political ideas and political agendas that's separating every individual. But so far, as you can see, everybody's enjoying a good afternoon of touch rugby.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the new government. It's like our life is just normal. Nothing has changed so far.
Richard Pamatato's reports for radio, however, found a different feeling in the villages.
Every day you're getting new people coming to sell you food. These people are just trying to make ends meet.
Before the coup in 2000, so everything is you buy in the good price, but now so everything is the price going up.
Now when the country change, the life is becoming difficult.
People coming here every day at our gate, asking for clothes and food every day. That has never happened to Fiji how many years back, but it's happening now.
Two quite different views. Julian, you did seem to find people who were genuinely happy with the way things were going, didn't you?
Yeah, most of the people we talked to in Suva itself. And what we wanted to do was try and just, the Commodore had said, go out and talk to people on the street. So we went along the street with our camera and tow and all that kind of stuff. And a couple of people were kind of looking at us, as if to say, you fellas looking for trouble or what? And then we just say, kia ora, kia ora, and they go, oh, bula, bula. And then one of them didn't know how to speak English, so we were speaking Māori, he was speaking Fijian. But anyway, and none of us knew what the heck was going on. But we talked to people and they were pretty positive about it. They supported him. They said that looking forward, they thought it was a good idea to hold off on elections till 2014. They thought things were going to get better, all that kind of thing. And these were all people in the city, which is why it's interesting hearing Richard's report from the villages, because obviously that's not the case of what he picked up.
It seemed that the Indo-Fijians in particular seemed very comfortable with what was going on.
Well, you've got to remember that one of the main reasons he says he did the 2006 coup was because he said the former government was racist, that the former parliament was racist by its very nature because it favoured Indigenous Fijians over Indo-Fijians. And whether or not a lot of them were thinking about that, or whether or not a lot of the Indo-Fijians thought that what he was doing was actually better for the country, was going to help the country, as he says, prosper, perhaps that was the reason. But you're right, most of, if not all of the Indo-Fijians we talked to said that they supported his moves, his initiatives.
Whereas, Richard, you found people with a pretty clear grievance. A lot of them don't seem to have enough to eat.
They don't have enough to eat. And in one of those clips, I'm sitting with a family in a squatter settlement, and you have no idea what the poverty is like. The smell, for a start, is something that, as I said in the report, grabs you at the throat. But there's the persistent coughing of the child. A baby was brought out that was 4 months old, and it looked really, really unwell. And the filth, the lack of food, and the inability of these people to have any ownership of anything. No power, nothing. But they were upfront enough to talk because, in a way, the Commodore doesn't affect them. He's outside their radar, and they're well outside his radar.
Is this also off the radar of people in the cities? Because I get the impression that would be news to some of the people in Suva.
It depends, again, who you talk to, and that's what is so interesting and so complicated about Fiji. Some of the people who live in those outlying squatter settlements actually might be working for people who live in urban centres as their house girl or their gardener. And so there is an exchange between them, but it's not in a way that we would be used to. And then you talk to people, again, who are educated living in those areas, and they're suffering as well because they might have a job or a part-time job, but they are, like that woman said, giving their food away at the gate. And that particular woman, when she fills her rice container, what's left over gets given to people who knock at the gate.
Did you get more from people like that through the anonymity of radio? Because there were people whose names you didn't use, weren't there?
I think I got all of it through the anonymity of radio, because I turned up in a rental car that was cheap. I was wearing very low-key clothing. It was just me and my recording device and somebody who would translate for me if I needed it. And there was no lights, camera, action. It was just me. And it took a long time to find those people and to allow them to be comfortable. So I didn't just go in and talk to them and go. That squatter village interview, I spent 3 or 4 hours there, and we only spoke in interview terms for, I think, 19 minutes. So the rest of it was just sitting on the mat and being part of, I suppose, letting them be more comfortable with me. And certainly when I was in a village on a remote island, that was conducted entirely in Fijian through a translator. And again, it took them, I had to speak to the village chief before anybody would talk to me.
Were you clear on what the economic problem was, that these people suddenly are struggling to feed themselves? Is it clear to anyone?
It is very clear, but it didn't happen because of the Commodore, and that's what is evident. The people I'd spoke to in one of the squatter camps had been there for 9 years. If you look at the economic history of Fiji, it's been up and down, up and down. And that capital flight that's occurring at the moment didn't just occur because of the coup. The fact that the sugar industry is in dire straits didn't occur because of the coup, but the coup is making things worse.
Julian, did you visit any businesses?
Well, aside from the markets and that kind of stuff, no. The main reason was because we flew on one day. The next day we had the interview with the Commodore. We got the invitation to go talk to whoever we wanted to, and then we had other people on our list that we wanted to talk to, and then we flew out the next day. So we didn't have the luxury of time, I guess, of being able to go out and get as many, because we wanted to go visit the squatter camps. We wanted to go talk to as many people as we possibly could, and simply didn't have the time. But what... I mean, we were aware of, we'd heard reports of, certainly from the New Zealand media, about the squatter camps. We'd heard reports of the increase in poverty, which is why we asked the question, is there an increase in poverty? And he said, well, no, there isn't. It's only at 40%. There's always been a poverty issue. And the reason, according to some, of the increasing poverty line being due to the fact that there is a military-run government is simply rubbish. And he just said that, it's rubbish. That's not the reason for it at all.
It's extraordinary that, with respect to the squatter camps, there's something that we hear about. I can't recall ever seeing TV footage of them. Can you ever recall seeing them? Why is that?
Well, I guess it's just an access thing, isn't it? And I think the pressure on television is that you need to get in there and you shoot very quickly, whereas with radio, you do have the luxury of a bit more time and you're not so visible. So I was able to go to places where nobody would get to simply because of my relative anonymity and the time.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I think I should say is that we thought there was going to be a high military presence as well. And we thought that was going to be the case no matter where we went after the interview anyway, even though we'd been given the consent from the Commodore to go and do so. We still thought there was going to be a high military presence, but everywhere we went and what people were telling us was that simply was not the case. It wasn't until we got back, a lot of the Fijians living in New Zealand have been told by their relations, have also seen for themselves the fact that there are undercover military people in a number of the communities, certainly in the capital in Fiji, and if you speak up and if you are negative about the government, then you get detained. And now we didn't see any of that. They talk about things, well, you can tell someone from the military because they've got shiny shoes and all that kind of stuff. We didn't see any of that, but we certainly heard about it before we got there and after we got there as well.
One thing that repeatedly came up, the phrase that repeatedly came up in the interview was, you don't understand us, or they don't understand us, or Australia and New Zealand don't understand us. Did he have some sort of point there?
Perhaps. I mean, he talked about Fijian democracy being different democracy completely from what we understand it to be. I think it's also a stock standard line as an excuse for him to be able to say that what I'm doing is something that I'm going to do and I don't care what other people think about it because they don't understand me. So there might be a bit of substance to it, but generally speaking, my impression is that he just says that because it's convenient for him to say it. And convenient for him to be seen to be standing up against the big bullies. And he talked about the big four in the Pacific Islands of being New Zealand, Australia, Samoa and Niue. But everyone else, he said, in the Pacific supports him. All the other Pacific leaders support him and what he's doing.
Richard, would it nonetheless be fair to say that we don't really understand our Pacific backyard very well?
I think it is fair to say that, and you see that particularly in the reporting of issues around, for example, the King of Tonga. He gets a particularly rough time, I think, from people who are really quite badly informed and don't know what they're talking about. So if you look at what's happening in Tonga, yes, we all agree there needs to be a lot of political change. But the people who comment, and they seem to centre all of their criticism around the King of Tonga, have no idea about what they're talking about. And then if you look at...
He's an easy target, isn't he?
He's a very easy target, and you can see why when you look at him, because he does present himself in that way. And he presents himself in a way that I think New Zealand, with its version of democracy, is deeply uncomfortable with. He is a king, and he drives around in a taxi, and we kind of don't like that. And then if you look at, for example, the driving in Samoa, there have been a lot of stories around that. Now, Radio New Zealand and Radio New Zealand International have been covering that for the last 2 years. It is a big issue, but a lot of the reporting of that seemed to me to say, well, they're Samoan people and they won't get driving on the other side of the road and it will be chaos and it will be a disaster.
It was treated as a novelty story, wasn't it?
It was treated as a novelty story, as often Pacific stories are. And then if you do a little bit of auditing of the content around them, words like traditional get associated with Pacific, or vibrant, or crime, or obesity. And if you look at recently the stuff that happens in Manukau City, it's always, let's talk to the community leaders. We'll get the community leaders to talk about this. But with the rioting in Dunedin this past week, with the Under 500, I haven't heard a single call to talk to a community leader. And it's those kinds of things. But that said, it also needs somebody who's prepared to go out there and do the work. You do have to know your material, just as if you were going to be an economics reporter. It's not like in the age of blogging or where people do a lot of cut and paste journalism that that is one of the reasons I think why.
But I mean, you mentioned blogging. Surely there must be some. I mean, there's some pretty lively blogs in Fiji or about Fiji. Can we keep up with what's going on there through that kind of media?
I think the blogging is important when it comes to that. I was talking in general about the coverage of Pacific issues, but I think blogging, Facebook, Bebo, YouTube are possibly, and Twitter are the most important ways that the Fijian population who are affected by this can get their message and the truth out.
Julian, do you think you'll be back in Fiji?
Well, I'm not too sure, given what I've just said tonight, and and given the way we presented the program that we did on Monday. Look, we hope so, because I think we've built a relationship. I mean, we've had a relationship with Fiji TV over the years. We've broadcast a number of the Māori rugby games against Fiji in the last 3 or 4 years as a result of the IRB Pacific Nations Cup. You know, he seemed to be willing to want to talk. He seemed to be willing to, I guess, in some small way, have a relationship with Māori television. But you know, whether or not, I mean, I think Richard's right when he said earlier, he has his good days and his bad days. And if you get him on a good day, he will talk, and he will talk a lot, and he'll be expressive, and he will say what he really feels. And if you get him on a bad day, and I haven't met him on a bad day, then that's perhaps not the case.
Well, we'll see whether he has a good day in 2014 then, shall we?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That does conclude this discussion. Thanks to Julian Wilcox and Richard Palmer-Tato. After the break, are we as pure as we like to think?